During the reading of my husband's will, my daughter-in-law whispered to the lawyers, "If the old lady makes a scene, just stick her in a nursing home." The shock came when the lawyer read my husband's final wishes. "I'm glad to have. You hear? Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. If the old lady makes a scene, just throw her in a nursing home and be done with it." The words, whispered by my daughter-in-law Stella to the lawyer, sliced through me like a knife. I sat frozen in the leather chair, my hands clasped tightly, in my lap, pretending I hadn't heard. But I had. Every syllable. The law office felt suddenly airless. The ticking of the antique clock on the wall seemed to grow louder with each passing second. I'd been married to Thomas for 45 years. 45 years of shared dreams, morning coffees, and gentle touches. Now he was gone, and I was sitting here, a 69-year-old widow, listening to my daughter-in-law plotting to discard me like yesterday's newspaper. Shall we begin? Mr. Patterson, Thomas's lawyer for the past 20 years, adjusted his glasses and opened the thick folder in front of him. My son David sat beside Stella, his face a mask of practiced grief. I wondered if he knew what his wife had just said, if he approved. I straightened my back, the pearl necklace Thomas had given me on our 40th anniversary hanging heavy around my neck. I wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. As per Mr. Thomas Wilson's last will and testament, Mr. Patterson began, his voice formal and detached. The primary residence at 1542 Maple Avenue, along with all furnishings and vehicles, is bequeathed to his son, David Wilson, and David's wife, Stella Wilson. The air left my lungs. Our home. The home where I'd raised our son. Where I'd tended the garden Thomas loved so much. Where we'd built a life together brick by brick, memory by memory. The sum of $200,000 from Mr. Wilson's. Retirement accounts will be transferred to Mrs. Beverly Wilson, Mr. Patterson continued, not meeting my eyes. Along with a monthly stipend of $2,000 for the remainder of her life. I felt the room sway. $2,000? In our neighborhood, that wouldn't even cover rent for a decent apartment. After 45 years, this was what Thomas thought I was worth? The remaining assets, including Mr. Wilson's investment portfolio, valued at approximately $3.2 million, will be transferred to David and Stella Wilson. Stella's hand found David's, squeezing it in triumph. A small, satisfied smile played at the corners of her mouth. There must be some mistake, I heard myself say, my voice sounding distant and hollow. Thomas and I built everything together. I was by his side for nearly half a century. Mr. Patterson looked uncomfortable, shuffling papers needlessly. I'm afraid these are Mr. Wilson's explicit wishes, Mrs. Wilson. The will was updated 6 months ago, shortly after his diagnosis. 6 months ago. When Thomas was already sick. When the medications were making him confused and forgetful. When Stella had suddenly become so attentive, bringing him homemade meals and sitting with him for hours while I rested. This is ridiculous, I said, my voice stronger now, fueled by a surge of anger. Thomas wouldn't do this. Not to me. Stella's face hardened. Beverly, please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Thomas made his wishes clear. We need to respect that. Respect? The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Like you respected me when you suggested putting me in a nursing home? Yes, Stella, I heard you. David's head snapped toward his wife, confusion flashing across his face. But Stella was too practiced at this game. Beverly, you're clearly upset, which is understandable given your loss. But making accusations isn't going to bring Thomas back. Her voice was honey-coated poison. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a short break? No, I said firmly. I want to understand when and why my husband decided to leave me with barely enough to survive on after promising me for decades that I would always be taken care of. The lawyer looked down at his notes. The changes were made on February 12th. Mr. Wilson was of sound mind when he signed the documents. I personally assessed his capacity. February 12th. I remembered that day. I had gone to visit my sister who had fallen and broken her hip. Thomas had insisted I go, said he would be fine for a few days. When I returned, Stella had been there, papers spread across our dining room table, claiming she was helping Thomas organize his medical bills. "I'd like a copy of the previous will," I said. "Beverly." David finally spoke, his voice strained. "Dad made his decision. Let's not drag this out." I looked at my son, this person I had carried inside me, nursed, raised, loved beyond measure. When had he become this stranger who could sit by and watch his mother be stripped of everything? "I'll have copies of all documents sent to you, Mrs. Wilson," Mr. Patterson said quietly. As I stood to leave, my legs unsteady beneath me, Stella leaned toward David. "We should list the house immediately. The market's hot right now." They weren't even going to wait until I had found somewhere to go. 45 years of marriage, and I had less than 30 days to vacate my home, my life. I walked out of the office with as much dignity as I could muster, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a physical thing. In the parking lot, I sat in my car, a car that technically now belonged to David and Stella, and finally allowed the tears to come. "Thomas, how could you do this to me? How could you leave me with nothing after all these years?" But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the dashboard, something hardened inside me. This wasn't over. Thomas may have signed that will, but I knew my husband. Something wasn't right, and I was going to find out what had really happened during those days I was away. They thought I was just a helpless old woman they could push aside. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The house felt different when I returned. That evening, emptier somehow, as if it already knew it would soon no longer be mine. I moved through the familiar rooms like a ghost, touching the things Thomas and I had collected over our lifetime together. The grandfather clock from our 10th anniversary, the hand-carved bookshelf he'd made when David was born, the worn leather armchair where Thomas had spent countless evenings reading, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Now it all belonged to David and Stella. I sank into Thomas's chair, breathing in the faint scent of his aftershave that still lingered, in the fabric. How could he have done this to me? The Thomas I knew would never have left me vulnerable, especially not after promising me for decades that I would always be taken care of. The shrill ring of the telephone startled me from my thoughts. "Mom?" David's voice sounded strained. "Are you all right? You left so quickly." "I'm fine," I lied, my fingers gripping the receiver tightly. "Just tired." "Listen, about the house. Stella and I were thinking—" "I don't want to talk about the house right now, David." My voice was sharper than I intended. A pause. "Sure, we can discuss it later. But Mom, we need to start thinking about where you'll go. Stella found some nice retirement communities." "Retirement communities? You mean nursing homes?" The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. "Mom, they're not nursing homes. They're for active seniors like you. You'd have your own apartment, activities, people, your own age. People my own age," I repeated flatly. "David, I'm not even 70. I'm perfectly capable of living independently." Another pause, longer this time. "We just want what's best for you." "What's best for me?" I laughed, a hollow sound. "Or what's best for you and Stella? Let me guess. These retirement communities would eat up that monthly stipend Thomas left me in no time, wouldn't they?" "Mom, that's not fair. We're trying to help." "Help? By pressuring me to move out of my home within days of your father's funeral? By already making plans for my life without even consulting me?" "You're upset, I understand. We can talk when you're feeling more reasonable. More reasonable. Like I was a child throwing a tantrum. Goodbye, David." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking as I made my way upstairs to the bedroom Thomas and I had shared for decades. The bed was still unmade from the morning of the funeral, I hadn't had the heart to disturb the last place Thomas had slept. I opened his closet, running my fingers over his neatly hung shirts, each one bringing back a flood of memories. The blue Oxford he'd worn to David's college graduation. The faded flannel he'd put on every Saturday morning to work in the garden. At the back of the closet, on the top shelf, sat a row of leather-bound journals. Thomas had been a meticulous record keeper, documenting everything from household expenses to garden plantings. I pulled down the most recent one, dated just 3 months before his death. Settling onto the edge of the bed, I opened the journal, finding comfort in Thomas's familiar handwriting. The entries were mostly mundane. Notes about his medication schedule, doctor's appointments, brief comments about the weather or what we'd had for dinner. Then a line caught my eye, dated February 10th, just 2 days before he'd changed his will. Called, "Jackson, about the cabin today. Everything is in order. Beverly will have what she needs when the time comes. Must make sure Stella doesn't find out." The cabin? Thomas and I had vacationed at a small rental cabin in the Adirondacks years ago, but we'd never owned property there. And why would he need to keep it from Stella? I flipped through more pages, scanning for additional mentions. There, on February 11th, transferred the final payment today. All paperwork is with Jackson. The deed is in B's name only. No matter what happens with the house, she'll have a place to go. My heart raced as I read the words again. A deed in my name? Thomas had bought property without telling me. The sound of a car door slamming in the driveway jolted me from my thoughts. I glanced out the window to see David's silver BMW parked behind my car. Stella was with him. Quickly, I returned the journal to its place and hurried downstairs, reaching the front door just as David's key turned in the lock. "Mom?" he called, stepping inside with Stella right behind him. "We brought dinner. Thought you might not feel like cooking." "That's thoughtful," I said cautiously, eyeing the paper bag from the local deli. Stella's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We also brought some boxes. Thought we could help you start sorting through your things. No rush, of course, but it's good to get a head start, right?" Boxes. They'd brought boxes. The funeral had been just 3 days ago. "That won't be necessary," I said coolly. "I'm capable of packing my own belongings when the time comes." David shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, we're just trying to help." "David," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "Who is Jackson?" His expression didn't change. "Jackson? I don't know any Jackson. Either he was lying or he genuinely didn't know. Given the secrecy in Thomas's journal, I suspected the latter. "Never mind," I said. "It's not important." Stella was already wandering into the living room, her critical gaze sweeping over the furniture. "This room gets such lovely light. I'm thinking we could put my grandmother's antique desk right by that window." She was already redecorating, in my home, while I stood right there. "I'm not very hungry," I said abruptly. "And I'm afraid I'm too tired for company tonight." David frowned. "Mom, we came all this way." "Please, David. It's been a difficult day." After they left, reluctantly, with Stella leaving the stack of flattened boxes in the hallway, I returned to Thomas's journals. I pulled them all down, settling on the bedroom floor with them spread around me. Hour after hour, I combed through the entries, looking for more mentions of Jackson or the cabin. In a journal from last year, I found it. "Met with Jackson today," about investment opportunity. Remote but beautiful location, good potential. If everything works out, it could be Beverly's safety net. Lord knows she'll need it after I'm gone. Thomas had known. Somehow he'd known that I would need a safety net, that I couldn't count on David to protect me, that Stella would try to push me out. But who was Jackson? And where was this property that Thomas had apparently purchased for me? I continued searching, until my eyes burned with fatigue. As dawn began to break, I finally found what I was looking for in one of Thomas's oldest journals, dating back nearly 20 years, helped Jackson Matthews get his law practice off the ground today. Small investment, but he's a good kid with a sharp mind. Catherine's boy will go far with the right support. Jackson Matthews, Catherine's son. Catherine, Thomas's secretary from his early days at the firm before he'd made partner. She'd been a single mother, I remembered, with a young son she'd often bring to the office during school holidays. Thomas had helped her son become a lawyer. And now, apparently, that same son was holding the key to whatever safety net Thomas had tried to create for me. I reached for the phone on the nightstand, then hesitated. What if Stella and David were monitoring my calls? What if they already knew about Jackson and were trying to get to him first? No, I needed to be careful. I needed to find Jackson Matthews on my own, without alerting David or Stella. Whatever Thomas had entrusted to him, it was meant for me and me alone. For the first time since the reading of the will, I felt a flicker of hope. Thomas hadn't abandoned me, after all. He'd left me a message, a path to follow, and I was going to find it, no matter what it took. Finding Jackson Matthews proved easier than I expected. A simple internet search revealed his law office, Matthews and Associates, located just 30 minutes from our home. Thomas had never mentioned him to me, at least not in recent years. Another secret he'd kept. I waited until I was certain David and Stella would be at work before making the call. My fingers trembled as I dialed. Matthews and Associates, how may I direct your call? A pleasant female voice answered. I'd like to speak with Jackson Matthews, please. It's regarding Thomas Wilson. A pause. May I ask who's calling? Beverly. Wilson. Thomas's wife. Another pause, longer this time. One moment, Mrs. Wilson. Less than a minute later, a deep voice came on the line. Mrs. Wilson, I've been expecting your call. I'm so sorry about Thomas. You've been expecting me? My heart raced. Yes. Thomas made me promise to wait for you to contact me. He said you'd figure it out on your own, that you were always smarter than anyone gave you credit for. That sounded like Thomas. Always believing in me, even when I doubted myself. I found his journals, I said. He mentioned something about a cabin? A deed in my name? Not over the phone, Mrs. Wilson. Can you come to my office? Today, if possible. I glanced at the clock. It was just past 10 a.m. I can be there by noon. Perfect. And Mrs. Wilson? Come alone. The drive to Jackson's office felt endless. Questions tumbled through my mind like clothes in a dryer. What had Thomas been planning? Why the secrecy? How long had he known that David and Stella couldn't be trusted? Matthews and Associates occupied a modest brick building downtown. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes, led me immediately to Jackson's office when I arrived. Jackson Matthews stood as I entered. He was in his early 40s, with Thomas's journal entries placed him in his 20s when Thomas had helped him establish his practice. He had a warm smile that immediately put me at ease. Mrs. Wilson, it's good to finally meet you. Thomas spoke. Of you often. Did he? I settled into the chair across from his desk. Funny, he never mentioned you to me. Jackson's smile turned sad. That was by design. What we were working on needed to stay completely confidential. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Thomas came to see me about 8 months ago, shortly after his diagnosis. He was worried about what would happen to you after he was gone. So he knew, I said quietly. He knew David and Stella would try to take everything. Jackson hesitated. He had concerns. He believed Stella had been influencing David for years, slowly turning him against you both. When Thomas got sick, he noticed certain patterns of behavior that troubled him deeply. Like what? Stella began taking a keen interest in his finances. She would offer to help organize his papers, ask questions about his investments. Then Thomas overheard a conversation between her and David. They were discussing how difficult you might become after Thomas was gone, how you might need specialized care. My stomach clenched. A nursing home. Jackson nodded. Thomas decided then that he needed to create a safety net for you, something that David and Stella couldn't touch. He slid the envelope across the desk. This contains the deed to a property in the Adirondacks. It's not just a cabin. It's a fully renovated 3-bedroom home on 5 acres of land with a small lake. Thomas purchased it outright in your name only. It's been fully furnished and stocked with everything you might need. My hands shook as I opened the envelope and pulled out the documents. There it was in black and white, a deed with my name on it. Photos spilled out showing a beautiful cedar home nestled among pine trees, with a wraparound porch overlooking a pristine lake. I don't understand, I whispered. If Thomas wanted to provide for me, why change his will to leave me almost nothing? Why let David and Stella have the house? Jackson leaned forward. That's where things get complicated. Thomas discovered that Stella had been pressuring him to change his will while he was on heavy medication. He was afraid that if he didn't appear to comply, she might take more drastic measures. So he gave them what they wanted. On the surface, yes. But he made sure you would be taken care of. The property is yours, free and clear. There's also this. He handed me another document. A bank account in the Cayman Islands? I stared at the paper in disbelief. With just over $2 million. Thomas had been quietly transferring funds for years. It's completely legal. He paid all taxes due. But it's also completely untraceable and out of David and Stella's reach. I couldn't breathe. Thomas hadn't betrayed me. He'd been protecting me all along. There's one more thing. Jackson hesitated. Thomas suspected that Stella might have been tampering with his medication during the final months. He couldn't prove it, but he was having periods of confusion that didn't align with his doctor's expectations for his condition. The room seemed to tilt. Are you saying she was poisoning him? Not exactly poisoning, but perhaps altering his dosages to make him more confused and compliant. It's why he insisted on changing his will himself, to give them what they thought they wanted while securing your future through other means. I thought of Stella's sudden interest in bringing Thomas his medication, insisting on organizing his pill boxes. The way she'd hover, watching him swallow each pill. Why didn't he tell me any of this? He was protecting you. He worried that if you knew, you might confront them, and that could have made the situation more dangerous for both of you. A tear slid down my cheek. Even in his final days, Thomas had been thinking of me, working to keep me safe. There's a letter, Jackson added softly, pulling a sealed envelope from his desk. Thomas asked me to give this to you once you knew everything. My name was written on the front in Thomas's familiar handwriting. I clutched it to my chest, not ready to read it yet. What do I do now? I asked. That's entirely up to you, Mrs. Wilson. You could move to the Adirondacks property immediately. Or, his eyes gleamed, you could play along a little longer, let David and Stella think they've won while you make your preparations more carefully. For the first time since Thomas's death, I felt a sense of power return. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't at their mercy. I think, I said slowly, that I'd like to give my dear daughter-in-law exactly what she deserves. Jackson smiled. Thomas said you'd say that. He also said you'd be magnificent. I read Thomas's letter alone that night, sitting in his armchair, with a glass of the scotch he'd loved. His words, tender, wise, and occasionally darkly humorous, brought him back to me for those precious moments. He explained how he'd first noticed Stella's manipulation of David years ago, how he'd tried to intervene subtly, but realized the hold she had on our son was too strong. I failed him, Bev, he wrote, but I refuse to fail you. They think you're just a sweet old lady who'll quietly accept whatever scraps they throw your way. Show them how wrong they are. The next morning, I drove to the Adirondacks to see the property. The winding country roads eventually led to a discreet turnoff marked only by a small wooden sign. Willow Point. Thomas had always called me his Willow, strong yet flexible, able to bend without breaking. The house took my breath away. Nestled among towering pines, it was everything I could have wanted, cozy yet spacious, with large windows that filled the rooms with natural light. The wraparound porch faced a small, pristine lake that sparkled in the morning sun. Inside, I found furniture I recognized from our weekend antiquing trips over the years. Pieces Thomas had claimed were being stored or had been sold. He'd been secretly creating this sanctuary for me all along. In the master bedroom, photographs of us lined the dresser, our wedding day, vacations, quiet moments in the garden. On the nightstand lay a book I'd mentioned wanting to read months ago. Every detail showed how well Thomas had known me, how deeply he'd loved me. I sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by grief and gratitude. The kitchen cabinets were stocked with my favorite foods, the bookshelves filled with novels I loved. In the small room overlooking the lake, an easel stood ready with fresh canvases and paints, remembering the art hobby I'd abandoned years ago to care for him during his illness. This wasn't just a house. It was the home of someone who had truly seen me. I spent the day exploring, discovering new thoughtful touches at every turn. As evening approached, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and pink. For the first time since Thomas's death, I felt peace, but also something else, determination. I wouldn't just disappear quietly. Thomas had given me not just a sanctuary, but a position of strength. I would use it. When I returned home the next day, David's car was in the driveway. Inside, I found him and Stella in the living room, surrounded by small colored stickers they were placing on various items. "Mom," David said, startled. "Where have you been? We've been calling." "I left my phone at home," I said calmly. "I needed some time to think." Stella's smile was tight. "We were just making inventory labels, for insurance purposes." "Of course, you were." I set my purse down. "How thoughtful." David shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, we need to talk about timeline. The real estate agent thinks—" "I've been looking at apartments," I interrupted. "I think I've found one that will work with my budget." The surprise on their faces was almost comical. They'd expected resistance, tears, pleading, not calm acceptance. "Oh," Stella recovered quickly. "That's wonderful. Where is it?" "Just a small place across town. Nothing special, but it's what I can afford now." David had the decency to look ashamed. "Mom, you know if you need help with the rent, that won't be necessary," I cut in. "I'll manage with what your father left me." Stella beamed. "I'm so glad you're being sensible about this, Beverly. It's what Thomas would have wanted." I bit my tongue. If she only knew what Thomas had actually wanted. "I'll need a few weeks to pack," I said. "There's 45 years of memories in this house." "Of course," David said quickly. "Take the time you need. Within reason," he added, with a glance at Stella. "We were thinking of starting renovations next month," Stella added. "The kitchen is so outdated. The kitchen Thomas and I had, remodeled just 3 years ago. I'll be out before then," I promised. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm rather tired from my drive." After they left, I called Jackson. "I've seen the house," I told him. "It's perfect, but I'm not ready to let David and Stella know about it yet." "What's your plan?" he asked. "I need information," I said, "about Stella's actions during Thomas's illness. If she was tampering with his medication, there might be evidence." Jackson was silent for a moment. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish?" "Beverly." "Justice," I said simply. "And maybe a chance to wake my son up from whatever spell she's cast on him." The next morning, I called Thomas's doctor and requested a meeting, claiming I needed closure about his final days. Dr. Levine agreed to see me that afternoon. In his office, I carefully steered the conversation toward Thomas's medication regimen. Was surprised by how confused he became toward the end, I said. It seemed to happen so suddenly. Dr. Levine frowned. Yes, that was unusual. His decline was more rapid than I expected given the progression of his disease. Could his medication have caused that? He hesitated. Potentially, if the dosages were incorrect. But Stella assured me she was following the prescribed schedule exactly. Stella? I kept my voice neutral. She was managing his medication? Yes. She insisted on taking over that responsibility. Said you were too overwhelmed. He paused. Wasn't that the arrangement? No, I said quietly. It wasn't. His expression changed. Mrs. Wilson, is there something I should know? I took a deep breath. Thomas changed his will during that period of confusion. He left almost everything to David and Stella, despite promising me for years that I would be provided for. Dr. Levine's frown deepened. That doesn't sound like the Thomas I knew. He spoke of you with such devotion. Is there any way to prove his medication was being mismanaged? He thought for a moment. We did run blood tests in those final weeks. The results should be in his file. I can review them, see if anything stands out. I would appreciate that, I said. And doctor, please don't mention this conversation to my son or daughter-in-law. As I left his office, my phone rang. It was Jackson. Beverly, I've found something interesting. Thomas had surveillance cameras installed in your home last year. The footage was being backed up to a secure server. My breath caught. Cameras? Where? In his study, the kitchen, and your bedroom, primarily focused on his medication area and his desk where he kept important papers. Did he tell you why? He suspected someone was going through his papers when you were both out of the house. Initially, he thought it might be a housekeeper, but it was Stella, I finished. Most likely. The footage is extensive. It will take time to go through it all. I'll help, I said immediately. Where can I access it? Come to my office tomorrow. We'll set up a secure viewing station. That night, as I sorted through Thomas's clothes, ostensibly packing but really looking for more clues, I heard the front door open. David's voice called out, "Mom?" I came downstairs to find him standing awkwardly in the foyer, alone. Stella's not with you? I asked. He shook his head. I wanted to talk to you. Just us. We sat in the kitchen, where I'd prepared countless family meals, where Thomas and I had shared our morning coffee for decades. Mom, I know this is hard, David began. But Dad wanted— Did he? I interrupted. Did he tell you that's what he wanted? Or did Stella? David's jaw tightened. Why do you always blame Stella? She's been nothing but supportive. Has she? Or has she been slowly turning you against me for years? That's ridiculous. Is it? When was the last time you visited us without her? When was the last time you called me just to chat, like you used to? He had no answer. David, your father was not himself when he changed that will. He was confused, disoriented. The lawyer said he was of sound mind. The lawyer saw him for 20 minutes. I lived with him. I saw how he changed after Stella started helping with his medication. David stood abruptly. I'm not going to listen to these accusations. As he stormed toward the door, I called after him. Check the medicine cabinet in your father's bathroom. Behind the spare towels, he kept a journal there, documenting every pill, every moment of confusion. David paused, his hand on the doorknob. For a moment, I thought he might turn back. Instead, he walked out, slamming the door behind him. But I had planted the seed. And tomorrow, I would begin reviewing the footage that might finally reveal the truth about Stella and what she had done. To my husband. For 3 days, I sat in Jackson's office reviewing the footage from Thomas's hidden cameras. What I saw confirmed my worst fears and broke my heart all over again. Stella, when she thought no one was watching, opening Thomas's pill organizer and switching medications, carefully documenting the original arrangement in a small notebook so she could switch them back before I returned home. Thomas, growing increasingly disoriented after taking the pills she gave him, and the worst betrayal of all, footage from February 12th, the day the will was changed. Thomas, barely able to hold his head up, signing papers Stella placed before him. David standing in the background, not participating but not intervening either. "This is criminal," Jackson said quietly as we watched. "Elder abuse, medication tampering, potentially fraud if Thomas wasn't competent when he signed." "Do you have enough to go to the police?" I asked. "More than enough." "But Beverly, are you sure that's what you want? This would tear your family apart." I thought of David, my only child, the little boy who once cried when he accidentally stepped on an ant, the teenager who defended smaller kids from bullies, the young man who had once been so kind, so principled. "My family is already torn apart," I said finally, "but I want one last chance to reach my son." The next day, Dr. Levine called. "Mrs. Wilson, I've reviewed Thomas's blood work from his final months. The levels of his primary medication were inconsistent, sometimes too high, sometimes too low. It's not what we would expect with proper administration." "Could it have been accidental?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Consistently inconsistent in this pattern?" "No, this appears deliberate." "Would you be willing to put that in writing?" A pause. "For Thomas's sake, yes." Armed with the doctor's report and copies of the most damning video footage, I was ready. I called David. "We need to talk," I said. "Just you, me, and Stella. About the house." "We've already discussed this, Mom." 1. "Conversation, David. Then I'll never bring it up again." He sighed. "Fine. Dinner tomorrow?" "That would be perfect." I spent the next day preparing. Not just the evidence, but myself. This confrontation would require all my strength, all my composure. They arrived at 7 p.m. sharp, Stella wearing an expensive, new dress, David looking tired and drawn. "Something smells wonderful," Stella said, her practiced smile firmly in place. "Thomas's favorite pot roast," I replied. I thought it fitting. We made awkward small talk through the main course. When I brought out coffee and dessert, David finally broached the subject. "Mom, about the house. Stella's found you a lovely apartment at Oakwood Gardens. It's a senior community, very active." "Very affordable," Stella added. "The stipend from Thomas should cover it perfectly." I took a sip of coffee. How thoughtful. "Before we discuss that, though, I wanted to ask about February 12th. They exchanged glances. "What about it?" David asked. "The day Thomas changed his will. You were both here, weren't you?" Stella's smile tightened. "Thomas asked us to help him, get his affairs in order. He was concerned about you, Beverly. He wanted to make sure David would be able to take care of you properly." "By leaving me nearly destitute?" "Mom." David's tone was warning. "We've been through this." "Yes, we have. But we haven't discussed why Thomas was so confused that day, or why his medication levels were all wrong in his blood work." Stella's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. "What are you talking about?" I retrieved the folder I'd prepared and slid Dr. Levine's report across the table. Thomas's doctor found irregular levels of medication in his system, levels consistent with deliberate mismanagement. David frowned, scanning the report. "This doesn't prove anything. Medications can interact." "You're right," I interrupted. "That alone doesn't prove anything." I placed my tablet on the table and turned it toward them. "This does." I pressed play. The screen showed Stella in Thomas's study, carefully opening his pill organizer, switching capsules from one compartment to another, taking notes in her little book. The color drained from Stella's face. David stared at the screen, then at his. "Wife, what is this?" he whispered. I played the next clip. February 12th. Thomas, barely conscious, signing papers. Stella guiding his hand. David in the background, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. "Turn it off," Stella snapped. "Why?" I kept my voice calm. "Does the truth bother you?" "Mom," David's voice shook. "Where did this come from?" Thomas installed cameras when he began to suspect someone was tampering with his medication. He was trying to protect himself. To protect me. Stella stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You've obviously doctored this footage because you can't accept that Thomas wanted to provide for his son." "Dr. Levine has already reviewed it," I said. "As has Jackson Matthews, Thomas's other lawyer." "Other lawyer?" David looked confused. "The one who helped Thomas create a trust for me. The one who holds the deed to my new home in the Adirondacks and manages my account in the Cayman Islands." Stella's face contorted with rage. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Thomas knew what you were doing, Stella. He played along to protect himself. And me. He let you think you'd won while he created a safety net you couldn't touch." I turned to my son. "David, did you know what she was doing to your father?" He looked shell-shocked. "No, I swear, Mom. I knew she wanted him to change the will, but I never thought." He turned to Stella. "Tell me you didn't do this." Stella's composure cracked. "You think I did this for me? I did it for us. Your parents had everything while we struggled with mortgage payments and car loans. We deserved this." "So, you poisoned my father." David's voice was barely audible. "I didn't poison him. I just adjusted things so he'd be more reasonable. He was going to die anyway." The silence that followed her outburst was deafening. David stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. "Get out," he finally said. "David, get out of my mother's house. Now." Stella grabbed her purse, her movements jerky with fury. At the door, she turned back. "This isn't over. You think you've won, but I'll fight this. That will is legally binding." "Actually," I said calmly, "a will signed under duress while being drugged isn't legally binding at all. Neither is one signed by someone whose competency was compromised through medication tampering. But feel free to explain all this to the police." After she stormed out, David collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. "Mom, I didn't know, I swear I didn't know she was drugging Dad." "But you knew she was pressuring him to change the will." He nodded miserably. She kept saying, "It made sense that you'd be better off with a monthly stipend than trying to maintain this big house alone, that we could take better care of you if we controlled the assets." "And you believed her?" "I wanted to believe her." His voice broke. "I was weak, selfish. Dad would be so ashamed of me." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Your father loved you, David, but he was worried about the influence Stella had over you." "How long?" He swallowed hard. How long had she been tampering with his medication? At least 3 months, according to the footage. Could it have hastened his death? The question I'd been asking myself for days. Dr. Levine thinks it's possible. The irregular dosing put additional stress on his system. David's face crumpled. "Oh, God." We sat in silence for a long moment. "What happens now?" he finally asked. "That depends on you," I said quietly. "The evidence goes to the police, or it doesn't. That's my decision. But what you do next, that's yours." Spring arrived in the Adirondacks with an explosion of wildflowers and birdsong. I sat on my porch, watching a pair of cardinals flit between the pine trees. Thomas had always loved cardinals, said they reminded him of me, bright and determined. "Morning." "Beverly!" My neighbor Eleanor waved as she passed by on her daily walk. I waved back, smiling. 6 months had passed since that fateful confrontation with Stella and David. 6 months of healing, of rebuilding, of finding my footing in this new life. The legal proceedings had been mercifully brief. Once faced with the evidence against her, Stella had agreed to a quiet divorce and returned everything she'd taken, in exchange for me not pressing criminal charges. The house on Maple Avenue was sold, the proceeds divided according to what would have been Thomas's wishes. Half to me, half to David. I'd chosen to stay at Willow Point permanently. The city held too many memories, both sweet and painful. Here, among the pines and the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore, I'd found peace. My phone buzzed with a text message. David. Just landed. Should be there by lunchtime. Need anything. From town? My heart warmed. These monthly visits had become our new tradition as we carefully rebuilt our relationship. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, still painful memories that arose unexpectedly. But we were trying. That counted for something. I texted back, just yourself. Drive safely. Inside, I checked on the lasagna in the oven, David's favorite since childhood. The house smelled of tomato sauce and herbs, warm and inviting. I'd spent the morning baking bread and preparing a salad from vegetables grown in my new garden. Gardening had been Thomas's passion, not mine, but I'd taken it up in his honor. To my surprise, I'd found joy in it, in the feel of soil between my fingers, in nurturing seedlings into flourishing plants. My first tomatoes had been lopsided and small, but I'd never tasted anything sweeter. The guest room was ready for David's overnight stay. Fresh towels in the bathroom, clean sheets on, the bed. The small desk in the corner held a surprise. Old photographs I'd found while unpacking, showing David as a child building sandcastles with Thomas at the beach. I'd learned to treasure these moments of preparation, this quiet anticipation of connection. After decades of being a wife and mother, I was discovering who Beverly was on her own terms. The sound of tires on gravel announced David's arrival. I smoothed my hair, now fully silver, no more hair dye for me, and went to greet him. He emerged from his car looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. The divorce from Stella had aged him initially, lines of stress and shame etching themselves around his eyes. But gradually, the son I'd known began to reemerge. Mom, he hugged me tightly. You look wonderful. You're not so bad yourself, I teased, noting his healthy tan. California agrees with you. The job offer from San Francisco had come 3 months after the divorce. A fresh start, he'd said. A chance to rebuild his life away from the whispers and stares. We'd both cried when he told me. Me at the thought of him being so far away. Him at the thought of leaving me alone. It's only a plane ride, I'd assured him. We'll make it work. And we had. Over lunch, David shared stories about his new position, his new apartment, the hiking group he'd joined. I told him about my garden, my painting classes, the book club I'd started with Eleanor and some other women from town. You seem happy, Mom, he said, helping himself to a second serving of lasagna. Really happy. I am. I realized it was true. Despite everything, the betrayal, the loss, the grief, I had found my way to happiness. After lunch, we walked down to the lake. The afternoon sun sparkled on the water, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead. I found more of Dad's journals, David said as we settled on the small wooden dock, from years ago when I first started dating Stella. I waited, giving him space to continue. He saw it, the way she was manipulating me, isolating me from you both. He tried to warn me, but I wouldn't listen. He skipped a stone across the water. I was so blind. We all have blind spots when it comes to love, I said gently. You saw what you wanted to see. I miss him, David's voice cracked. I keep thinking about all the conversations we'll never have, all the chances I had to really listen to him, to learn from him. I took his hand. Your father knew you loved him, David, despite everything. He nodded, blinking back tears. Last night, I dreamed he was sitting on this dock, fishing. He looked so peaceful. When I sat down beside him, he said, She's going to be all right, son. Beverly's stronger than both of us put together. I laughed through my own tears. That sounds like Thomas. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. I've been thinking, David said finally, about moving back east. My heart skipped. Oh? Not right away. Maybe in a year or two when my contract ends. There's a satellite office in Boston. It would be a shorter flight. More frequent visits. You don't need to make decisions based on me, I said. I want you to live your life, David. I know, but family is important. Dad taught me that, even if I forgot it for a while. He hesitated. There's someone I'd like you to meet, too. Her name is Claire. She's a pediatrician. You're dating? I couldn't hide my surprise. After Stella, I'd assumed it would be years. Before David trusted again, he nodded, a shy smile crossing his face. It's new, but good. She's kind, Mom. Really kind. I'd love to meet her. Later that evening, after David had gone to bed, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine. The night was clear. Stars scattered across the black velvet sky like diamonds. I thought of Thomas, of the life we'd shared, of the gift he'd given me. At the end, not just financial security, but the chance for a new beginning. I pulled his letter from my pocket. I'd read it so many times the paper was soft and creased along the folds, but the words still brought me comfort. My dearest Beverly, if you're reading this, then you found your way to Willow Point, just as I knew you would. You were always the clever one. I'm sorry for the deception, for not telling you what Stella was doing. I was trying to protect you, though perhaps I should have trusted your strength more. You've always been the oak to my willow, bending with the storms but never breaking. This place is my final gift to you. Not just a house, but a future. Paint those landscapes you've always talked about. Plant that garden, make new friends, live, my darling. Remember me but don't cling to grief. We had 45 wonderful years together. Now it's time for you to write the next chapter on your own terms. I'll love you always, Thomas. I folded the letter, carefully, and tucked it away. Looking out at the starlit lake, I raised my glass in a silent toast. I'm living, Thomas, I whispered to the night air. Just like you wanted. The next morning, David and I had breakfast on the porch. He'd extended his stay by an extra day, a small gift that meant more than he knew. I was thinking, I said, passing him the coffee, that bedroom at the end of the hall would make a perfect studio. I might finally take up painting seriously. Dad would love that, David smiled. He always said you had talent. He exaggerated. I laughed, but it brings me joy, and that's what matters. As we sat there, planning my studio, talking about David's future, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. Not just for the material security Thomas had provided, but for this second chance at a relationship with my son. For the opportunity to discover who I was beyond wife, beyond mother. Thomas had given me the greatest gift of all, the freedom to reinvent myself at 69, to discover that life could still hold wonder and purpose and joy, even after devastating loss. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving, creating a life filled with meaning on my own terms, and somewhere I was certain Thomas was smiling. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.